We're already on the trip. We only invited people who actually matter. Just send the beach house keys. Don't cause trouble. That was my stepmother, Diane, calling from my beach house. My late father left it to me. She was telling me I wasn't family enough to come to my own family vacation. I smiled. I hung up. 3 days later, I sent the keys in a sealed envelope. When Diane opened it at a charity party in front of 85 guests, she screamed so loud the musicians stopped playing. But what was inside that envelope? And why did it make a 58-year-old woman lose everything she'd spent 4 years stealing? That's what I need to tell you from the beginning. Before I continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with this story. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. My name is Abigail Vance. I'm 34 years old. I design outdoor spaces in Massachusetts. And this is the story of how I almost lost my father's house and found my own voice instead. Now, let me take you back to a Tuesday morning in late June, the day the phone call changed everything. Before I can explain the envelope, you need to understand what Whiterest means to me. Whiterest is a house sitting on a cliff in Truro, Cape Cod, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. It has 4 bedrooms, a porch that wraps all around, and a view that makes you forget you have a phone. Experts said it was worth $6.8 million in January 2024. But to me it was never about the money. It was about the man who bought it. My father, Raymond Vance, was a lawyer who helped people with their wills. He had a small practice in Hyannis and the kind of handshake that made people trust him right away. He bought Whiterest in 2003 when I was 11. This was 2 years after my mother died from cancer. The house was supposed to be a fresh start. And for a while it was. Every summer, Dad and I would paint the fence, fix broken boards on the porch, and sit outside while he taught me about houses and buildings. That porch is where I decided to become an architect. That porch is where my father became my best friend. Then he remarried. Diane Ashford came into our lives when I was 18 and already packing for college in Boston. She was polished, well-spoken, and very good at making my father feel needed. Meredith, their daughter, was born a year later. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, every time I came home to Whiterest, I felt less like a daughter and more like a visitor. Dad used to say something I never fully understood until much later. "This house is yours, Abby. I've made sure of that on paper." I thought he was just being emotional. I never read his will. 2 weeks after his funeral, Diane changed the locks. She said it was for safety. I told myself it was just a lock. But looking back, it was the first door she shut on me. The locks were only the beginning. Over the next 4 years, Diane slowly removed me from the family the way you'd remove a stain from cloth. Carefully, step by step, until nothing remained. Thanksgiving 2021, 5 months after Dad died, Diane told me the gathering was too small. Just close family dealing with sadness. I found out later there were 14 people at the table, including Diane's sister and 2 neighbors I'd never met. Christmas 2022, I was invited, but I sat at a small folding table near the kitchen while Meredith's friends filled the dining room. I cut the turkey. I served the pie. No one thanked me. Then there was the group chat. Our family text thread, Vance Family, had existed since 2019. In September 2022, I noticed I'd stopped getting messages. When I asked Diane, she laughed softly. "Oh, we started a new one for planning. Must have been a mistake." There was no mistake. There was no invitation to the new thread either. But the part that kept me hanging on, the part I'm almost embarrassed to admit, was the charity. The Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund was created in Dad's name 3 months after he died. Its goal was to protect and fix beaches along Cape Cod, something Dad cared about his entire career. I wanted to honor him, so I gave $2,000 every month, without fail. $24,000 a year. I sent the money under my own name. But when the fund's yearly report came out each December, my donations appeared under one line, the Ashford Vance Family. My name was nowhere. I was sending $24,000 a year into a fund that had my father's name. I had no idea where that money was actually going. I wouldn't find out for another 18 months. And when I did, it changed everything. Tuesday, June 25, 2007, in the afternoon. I remember the time because I was staring at my desk clock, trying to talk myself into making the call. Every summer, The Vance family spent a week at Whitehurst. Every summer, I tried to plan my work around it. And every summer for 4 years, I ended up alone. Not invited, or invited too late, or told the dates had changed. But I kept trying because trying was all I had left of belonging. Diane answered on the third ring. I heard waves. I heard laughter. Meredith's, high and careless somewhere nearby. I heard ice clinking in a glass. We're already on the trip, Diane said, her voice light, as if she were turning down a salesperson. We only invited people who actually matter. A pause, then quieter. Just send the beach house keys. Don't cause trouble. I didn't speak for several seconds. In the background, Meredith said something I couldn't hear, and both of them laughed. Then Diane added, almost like it was nothing. And while we're at it, Marcus is writing something for you to sign. It's about the house. It's time we made things official, Abigail. Your father would have wanted the whole family to share it. She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my studio with my hands flat on the desk, my chest tight, my vision a little blurry. Then I opened my email. There it was, sent 45 minutes before the call. From Marcus Bentley, lawyer. A paper to transfer full ownership of Whitehurst to the Ashford Vance Family Trust. Deadline to sign. 10 days. My father's signature was in his will, leaving me that house. And someone was asking me to erase it. That's when I picked up the phone again. Not to call Diane, but to dial a number I'd saved for 4 years and never once used. Thomas Calloway. My father's oldest friend. Thomas Calloway's office sat on a quiet side street in Hyannis, above a bookshop that smelled like wood and salt. I was there by 2 o'clock the next afternoon, June 26th, sitting across from a 61-year-old man with silver hair, reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of steady calm that told me he'd been waiting for this call for a long time. Your father asked me not to contact you first, Thomas said, sliding a folder across the desk. He said you'd come when you were ready. Inside was a certified copy of Raymond Vance's last will, changed on March 15, 2021, 3 months before he died. I'd been given a copy at the reading, but I'd never studied it closely. Sadness does that. You put things away and tell yourself you'll read them later, and later turns into years. Thomas guided me to the section on Whitehurst. The words were clear. The property was left solely to Abigail Elaine Vance, free and clear. Not shared property, not trust property, mine. Then he turned to a section I'd never noticed. Article 14. 3. The penalty rule. It read in part, if any person receiving something from this will, or anyone related to them, is proven to have stolen, falsely transferred, or misused any property from this estate, including any charity fund with the deceased person's name, that person's entire inheritance will be taken away and given to the preservation fund under the executor's control. I read it twice. Then I looked at Thomas. Your father designed this as a safety lock. He said he knew Diane. He didn't trust her with the money. But he also didn't want a fight before there was proof. Thomas paused, removed his glasses, and met my eyes. I'm the executor, Abigail. I have the legal power to use that rule, but I need evidence, real, documented evidence. Your father didn't leave you unprotected, he said quietly. He just trusted you'd find your way here when you were ready. I left that office holding a folder that felt heavier than it looked. And for the first time in 4 years, the weight wasn't sadness. It was possibility. Thomas made one phone call, and Nina Aldridge was in my life by Thursday morning. Nina was 37, a financial detective who'd spent 6 years working for the state before going independent. She had a shaved undercut, thick-rimmed glasses, and a way of looking at numbers the way most people look at crime scenes, with focus, patience, and no emotion. Thomas hired her on my behalf for $8,500, which I paid from my savings. It was the most expensive thing I'd ever bought that wasn't a building. Between June 27th and June 30th, Nina pulled 3 years of money records from the Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund. What she found made me sit down. $340,000 had been paid out under labels like event management fees and consulting services. The companies listed were either fake or traceable to a single shell company, Ashford Creative, registered in Delaware in August 2022. The only owner of that company was Meredith Vance. The money flowed from the fund into Ashford Creative's account, then straight into Meredith's personal bank account. 17 separate payments over 28 months. And my $24,000 a year? Recorded in the fund's donor records under the Ashford Vance family. My name erased. Nina put together a 47-page report, signed officially on July 7th, with copies of the company filing, bank transfer records obtained legally through a court order Thomas got as executor, and a one-page summary showing every dollar and every date. The paper trail is clean, Abigail, Nina told me, straightening the pages on her desk. They weren't even careful. They didn't think anyone would look. $340,000, every cent traceable. But I didn't go to the police. I didn't call Diane. Because Thomas told me there was a better way. And it started with a party invitation that had just arrived in my mailbox. The night of June 30th, I sat alone in my apartment in South Boston with everything laid out on the kitchen table like evidence at a trial. The certified copy of Dad's will, Nina's 47-page report, the paper asking me to give up the house from Marcus Bentley, and a cream-colored invitation printed in navy ink. The Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund cordially invites you to our yearly benefit party. July 12th, Harborview Hotel, Edgartown, Martha's Vineyard. Drinks at 6 p.m., dinner and program to follow. 85 confirmed guests. The guest list read like a who's who of Cape Cod donors and leaders. The president of Cape Cod 5 Bank, 2 town officials, 3 real estate lawyers, Margaret Hale from the Cape Cod Times, and a representative from the Massachusetts Attorney General's nonprofit office, invited by Diane herself, no less, to show the fund's honesty. I picked up the framed photo of Dad from the bookshelf. He was standing on the Whiterist porch, sleeves rolled, squinting into the sun, holding a paintbrush like a conductor's baton. I could almost hear him. A house is just wood and nails, Abby. But what you build inside it, that's the legacy. At 11:47 that night, I wrote Thomas an email. I'm not signing the paper. I'll be at the party. Let's do this the right way. He responded in 9 minutes. Your father always said you'd know when it was time. I'll file the request with Barnstable Probate Court on Monday. Hearing date, July 18th. I closed my laptop and looked at the table again. In 12 days, I would walk into a room where my stepmother was queen, and I would hand her an envelope that could end her reign. I had spent 4 years being the person who didn't cause trouble. That time was over. I sometimes wondered if Diane ever lay awake at night worrying that someone might look too closely. Based on what happened next, I don't think she lost a minute of sleep. On July 2nd, Meredith emailed me. The subject line was a single heart emoji. The message was not as gentle. Mom says you haven't signed the paperwork yet. She's putting you on the party guest list as a favor, but she really hopes you won't make this awkward for everyone. Dad would hate that. Dad would hate that. She used our dead father as a leash, and she didn't even hesitate typing it. The same day, Thomas noticed something in the court papers. Marcus Bentley had filed a claim on July 1st at Barnstable Probate Court, arguing that Whiterist was shared marital property, that because Raymond had used income earned during his marriage to Diane for house repairs and taxes, Diane had a lawful interest. It was a stretch, but it was strategic. If a judge considered it, the case could drag on for months. Then Thomas got the party schedule from a board member he knew. The plan was surgical. After a tribute video for Raymond, Diane would take the stage to announce that the Vance family had unanimously agreed to transfer Whiterist into the Ashford Vance Family Trust as a community coastal center. She planned to present it as done, my signature already implied, in front of 85 important witnesses. By the time the truth came out, social pressure would have made the story stick. But buried in that same guest list, Thomas noticed a name that made him pause. Margaret Hale, investigative reporter for the Cape Cod Times, specializing in nonprofit management. Diane had invited her for good publicity. She had no idea she'd handed us a front-row witness. She built her own stage, Thomas said over the phone that evening, and she doesn't know we're about to use it. The 7 days between July 3rd and July 10th were the quietest of my life, and the most purposeful. I worked with Thomas and Nina every evening after my regular work hours. We put together the package. A certified copy of the changed will with Article 14. 3 highlighted, Nina's signed 47-page audit report finalized on July 7th. A single-page timeline showing every fraudulent payment with dates and dollar amounts, and copies of the Ashford Creative Company registration alongside the matching bank transfers. During the days, I kept my head down and finished what I'd started. I delivered the final restoration drawings for the Eastham Lighthouse to Gerald Whitmore, chairman of the Eastham Preservation Council, on July 8th, 2 days ahead of schedule. Gerald was 70, with sun-weathered hands and a voice like gravel wrapped in kindness. He studied my plans for a long time, then looked up. "You're the most careful architect I've ever worked with, Abigail," he said. "Your father would be proud." I nearly broke right there in his office. I didn't. I thanked him, shook his hand and drove home. That night, I placed everything into a single cream-colored envelope, the same shade as the party invitation. I slid the spare Whiterest keys in first, then the documents. I sealed it with clear packing tape and wrote on the front in my neatest handwriting, "For Diane Ashford Vance, as requested." She wanted the keys. They were in there, exactly as she demanded, but so was everything else. I didn't lose sleep those 7 days. For the first time in 4 years, I slept like someone who had stopped pretending. Pretending that silence was peace, that giving in was love, that giving everything away was the price of belonging. The envelope sat on my nightstand like a quiet bomb. In 48 hours, I'd deliver it in person. The morning of July 12th, I boarded the ferry at Woods Hole with a shoulder bag containing the sealed envelope, a fully charged phone, and the Eastham Lighthouse drawings, just in case anyone at the party needed a reminder of what I actually did for a living. The crossing to Vineyard Haven took 45 minutes. I stood on the upper deck and watched Cape Cod shrink behind me, the wind pulling at my hair, and I thought about every ferry ride I'd taken with Dad as a kid. How he'd always buy me a cranberry juice and point out the bird nests on the channel markers. He made everything feel safe, even open water. Harborview Hotel in Edgartown is a white wooden landmark from 1891. All wraparound porches and widows' walks, sitting on a hill above the harbor. The party would begin at 6. Drinks on the porch. Dinner in the main ballroom. 85 guests, bank presidents, town officials, lawyers, donors. Margaret Hale with her reporter's notebook, and Victoria Marsh from the Massachusetts Attorney General's nonprofit division, who Diane had personally invited to prove the fund's honesty. Diane's stage. Diane's crowd. Diane's night. I checked in at 4, hung my navy blazer on the back of the bathroom door, and sat on the edge of the bed holding the envelope. My phone buzzed. Thomas texting from the next ferry. "I'm 30 minutes behind you, but heads up. Marcus Bentley just filed an emergency request to delay the July 18th hearing. 60 more days for discovery. If the judge agrees, Diane buys herself 2 months to spin this. Tonight matters more than ever." I set the phone down, looked at the envelope, and breathed out. In 2 hours, I would walk into a room full of people who believed Diane Ashford Vance was the guardian of my father's legacy, and I would show them the truth, or lose everything trying. 6:15. The porch was already crowded. Linen suits, sundresses, champagne glasses catching the last golden light over Edgartown Harbor. A string quartet played near the railing. Everything smelled like roses and salt air and money. I stepped through the French doors, and Diane found me within seconds, as if she'd had someone watching the entrance. She was glowing. Cream silk dress, pearl earrings, a smile so wide and warm you'd think she'd been counting the days until she saw me. "Abigail, you made it." She kissed the air near my cheek and gripped my elbow, steering me toward the far corner of the porch before I could greet anyone else. The moment we were out of earshot, the warmth disappeared. "Did you bring the keys?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Marcus has the paperwork inside. We can do this quietly during drinks. Sign, smile, and no one needs to know the details." I held her gaze. "I brought the keys, Diane. You'll get them tonight." Something flickered behind her eyes. Relief? Maybe. Or victory. She squeezed my arm. "Good girl." She walked away, and within a minute, Meredith appeared beside a group of guests near the bar, champagne in hand, gesturing toward me with a smile. "Abigail is such a sweetheart. She's going to help us turn Whiterest into something the whole community can enjoy." I didn't correct her. Not yet. Instead, I scanned the room. Margaret Hale was at the bar, notebook open, pen moving. Victoria Marsh, mid-40s, dark blazer, no champagne, was talking to the Cape Cod 5 president near the flowers. And behind the ballroom side door, I could see Diane testing the microphone on the stage, leaning toward the event coordinator. "After the tribute video, I'll make the announcement about Whiterest. Keep the lights on me." Thomas arrived at 6:40, caught my eye from the entrance, and gave a single quiet nod. "Don't embarrass yourself tonight, Abigail," Diane had whispered to me in that corner. "You're here because I allowed it." Remember that. I remembered. I would remember it for the rest of the evening. At 7:30, the ballroom lights dimmed, and 85 people turned their chairs toward the screen. The tribute video ran 4 minutes. It opened with a photograph of my father standing in front of the Barnstable Courthouse in 1998, young and sharp-jawed, briefcase in hand. Then came images of him at Whitehurst, painting the fence, standing on the cliff, shaking hands at a groundbreaking ceremony for a beach restoration project. My father's voice, pulled from a recorded speech, filled the room. The coastline doesn't belong to any of us. We're just its caretakers. I watched for myself in that video. I appeared once, a blurry shape in the background of a family photo from 2017, half cut by the frame. Diane and Meredith, by contrast, filled nearly every other image. Diane at Raymond's side at parties. Meredith as a toddler on the Whitehurst porch. A family I barely recognized, built from photographs I'd never been invited to take. When the video ended, Diane rose and walked to the stage as if stepping into a spotlight designed just for her. Her voice shook, perfectly measured, just enough emotion to sound real without losing control. Raymond's dream was always that Whitehurst would serve a greater purpose, she said, one hand on her heart. And tonight, I'm proud to announce that our family, united, has decided to transfer the property into the Ashford Vance Family Trust to become a coastal preservation center, open to the public. Applause filled the room. Margaret Hale looked up from her notes. Victoria Marsh nodded approvingly. Then Diane turned, found me at table 4, and extended her hand like a queen summoning a subject. Abigail, sweetheart, would you like to come up and say a few words? We have the paperwork ready. This is your father's legacy, after all. 85 pairs of eyes turned to me. The room was silent except for the faint clink of a glass somewhere near the back. I stood up. I picked up the envelope from beside my plate, and I walked toward the stage. Diane was smiling, the kind of smile that says, I've already won. She had no idea that the envelope in my hand wasn't surrender. The stage was small, just a platform with a podium and a single microphone, but it felt enormous. The ballroom lights were angled upward, and I could see every face in the first 3 rows clearly. Donors. Officials. Margaret Hale with her pen frozen mid-word. Diane stood beside me, still smiling, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder as if presenting a gift. I leaned into the microphone. Thank you, Diane, for that beautiful tribute, I said. My voice was steady, steadier than I expected. My father loved Whitehurst more than any place on earth, and he was very, very specific about what he wanted for it. I paused. The room waited. I won't be signing the paperwork tonight. I let the sentence land. Somewhere near the back, a chair creaked. Whitehurst was left to me, solely to me, in my father's final will, dated March 15, 2021, and carried out by his lawyer and estate executor Thomas Calloway, who is here tonight. Thomas stood at table 7. He adjusted his jacket, nodded once toward the room, and remained standing. Diane's hand slid off my shoulder. The murmuring started, low, confused, spreading table by table like wine through tall grass. I turned to Diane and held out the envelope. You asked for the keys, I said, my voice still even. They're in here, along with something else my father left. Something I think everyone in this room should know about. Diane's calm held for exactly 3 seconds. She took the envelope, tore it open, and the Whitehurst keys clattered onto the podium. Then she pulled out the documents. I watched her eyes move across the first page, the highlighted text of Article 14. 3. Then the second page. Nina's 1-page summary. Summary of unauthorized payments. Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund. Total. $340,000. The color left her face in stages, like a tide pulling back from sand. But Diane didn't fall apart. She straightened her spine and turned to the room. This is absurd, she said, her voice rising. Abigail is clearly acting out of sadness. Marcus, tell them. She scanned the ballroom for Marcus Bentley. He was already standing at table 2, jaw tight, saying nothing. Thomas was already walking toward the stage before Diane finished her sentence. He didn't rush. He climbed the platform with the careful, purposeful posture of a man who had spent 40 years standing in front of judges. And when he reached the microphone, he spoke the way my father used to, like every word had been weighed in advance. My name is Thomas Calloway. I served as Raymond Vance's personal lawyer for 23 years, and I am the court-appointed executor of his estate. He paused, letting the facts settle. The will is clear. Whiterest belongs to Abigail Vance. It has never been subject to any family trust, marital claim, or shared arrangement. He turned a page in the folder he'd carried to the stage. Article 14. 3 of the will contains a penalty rule written by Raymond himself, which states that any person or related party proven to have stolen funds from the estate, including the charity fund with his name, loses their entire inheritance. Then came the numbers. Ashford Creative LLC, registered in Delaware, August 2022. Only owner: Meredith Vance. Thomas read each fact as if reading a court filing. 17 separate payments over 28 months. $340,000 paid out as consulting and event management fees to a company with no employees, no office address, no tax filings, and no documented work. Meredith shot to her feet at table 3, face flushed. That's my consulting company. I did real work. Thomas didn't raise his voice. The company has produced no invoices, no contracts, and no evidence of services performed. The funds transferred directly to your personal bank account. Silence. Complete, ringing silence filled the ballroom. Victoria Marsh, the AG representative, set her glass on the table, pulled out her phone, and stepped toward the hall. Margaret Hale's voice recorder had been running for 5 minutes already, its small red light glowing beside her napkin. And Marcus Bentley stood, adjusted his tie, and said quietly to Diane, "I need to speak with my client privately." Then he walked out of the ballroom without looking back. Marcus walked out, and with him walked the last person willing to defend Diane Ashford Vance in a room full of witnesses. What happened next is something I've replayed in my mind more times than I can count. Not because it felt good, but because it felt final. Diane stood at the podium alone now, the microphone still live. The room was so quiet I could hear the harbor bell outside. She gripped the edge of the podium with both hands and did the one thing she should not have done. She kept talking. "Raymond would be ashamed of you, Abigail." Her voice cracked, but not from sadness, from anger. "You're destroying this family for a house." No one moved. 85 people had just heard documented evidence that Diane had taken $340,000 from her late husband's charity. And now she was using his name to shame the daughter he'd specifically protected. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Then Gerald Whitmore, the man who'd called my lighthouse restoration work careful, the chairman of the Eastham Preservation Council, stood up at table 5. "I've worked with Abigail for 2 years, he said, his gravel voice carrying without a microphone. She restored the Eastham Lighthouse with the kind of honesty Raymond himself would have demanded. He paused, looked directly at Diane. "I think we all know who's destroying what here." Scattered applause broke out, then spread, rippling across the room like a wave finding shore. Diane grabbed Meredith by the wrist and turned for the exit. But as they passed table 3, Meredith, crying now, mascara running, said something into the still-live wireless microphone clipped to the flower centerpiece. "You promised no one would find out, Mom." The words rang through the speakers, clear as a bell. Margaret Hale wrote them down word for word. Diane didn't look back. The ballroom doors closed behind them, and the string quartet, unsure of what else to do, began to play again softly, as if hoping the music might erase what everyone had just witnessed. It wouldn't. Victoria Marsh returned from the hall and walked straight to Thomas. "My office will be requesting a full audit of the fund first thing Monday," she said, her voice low but firm. "This isn't just a family matter anymore." I didn't say another word after Diane left the stage. I didn't need to. The numbers had already said everything. Thursday, July 18th, 10 in the morning. Barnstable County Probate and Family Court. I wore the same navy blazer I'd worn at the party. Not because I was making a statement, but because it was the only professional jacket I owned that didn't have paint on the sleeves. Thomas sat beside me at the petitioner's table. Nina was in the row directly behind us, her laptop bag on her knees, ready if the judge asked for source documents. Diane sat on the opposite side with a new lawyer, a gray-haired woman from a Hyannis firm I didn't recognize. Marcus Bentley had formally withdrawn from the case on July 15th, citing irreconcilable differences in legal strategy. Meredith was not present. The emergency request to delay had been denied. The Attorney General's office had filed a brief the previous week supporting the original hearing date, arguing that any delay risked further loss of estate property while the fund remained under investigation. Thomas presented the case step by step. He entered into evidence the certified will, the penalty rule, and Nina's 47-page report, which had already been filed with the court 10 days earlier. Diane's new lawyer challenged the penalty rule, arguing it was unusually harsh. Judge Eleanor Garrett listened, reviewed the will's language for several minutes, then removed her glasses. The deceased person's intent was clear, she said. His language was exact, and the evidence of stealing is clear. The penalty rule is hereby activated. She read the ruling slowly. Diane's entire inheritance share, the life insurance payout of $1. $2 million still held in escrow, her equity interest in the fund, her claim to any jointly managed estate property, was taken away and given to the preservation fund under Thomas's control as executor. Whiterest was confirmed as the sole property of Abigail Elaine Vance. No debt, no dispute. Diane sat motionless through the ruling, her hands folded in her lap, staring at a point somewhere above the judge's head. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. When it was over, she stood, buttoned her jacket, and walked out of the courtroom without looking at me. It was the first time in 4 years that Diane Ashford Vance had nothing to say to me. And I realized with a strange hollow clarity that silence was the only honest thing she'd ever given me. The article went live at 6 o'clock in the morning on Monday, July 22nd. Margaret Hale's name ran across the top of the Cape Cod Times digital edition. Vance Foundation under state review after party revelation. $340,000 in questionable payments. 2,200 words. Front page of the online edition. Citing the audit report, a statement from Victoria Marsh's office, and on-the-record confirmation from Thomas that the penalty rule had been activated by court order. The article did not name me as the person who brought the evidence forward. Thomas, in his role as executor, was the formal complainant. I was mentioned once, Abigail Vance, the sole heir to the Whiterest property and a licensed landscape architect specializing in historic coastal restoration. That was enough. That was more than Diane had ever allowed me to be in print. By noon, my phone had 47 unread messages. Friends, former classmates, colleagues, people I hadn't heard from in years, reaching out with some version of, I had no idea, or I always thought something was off. Gerald Whitmore texted a single line, "Proud of you, kid." The institutional fallout was immediate. Cape Cod 5 announced the suspension of its $50,000 yearly grant to the fund, waiting for the outcome of the Attorney General's review. 2 individual donors, both party attendees, withdrew pledges totaling $35,000. Diane posted a Facebook status that evening. "My family is going through a difficult time. I ask for privacy." It received 12 likes and 43 comments, most of which were questions she didn't answer. Later that week, Margaret Hale called me, not for a follow-up quote, but for something else entirely. "I'd heard rumors about that fund for 18 months, she said. But no one would go on the record. No one would confirm anything. You didn't just save your house, Abigail. You gave me a source." I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. My silence for 4 years hadn't protected anyone. It had only protected Diane. 3 of those 47 messages were from Meredith. I didn't open them. Not yet. By August, the dominoes had a rhythm of their own. The Attorney General's office completed its early audit in the 3rd week of the month. The conclusion was exactly what Nina's report had shown. $340,000 in funds paid out without real reason. Diane and Meredith were ordered to pay back the full amount within 120 days or face civil charges under Massachusetts law. Ashford Creative LLC was ordered shut down by Delaware. Diane was removed as chair of the fund's board. Thomas was made temporary leader with oversight from the AG's office. The fund, for the first time since its creation, had a financial structure that my father would have actually recognized. The personal toll was steep and specific. Diane's condo in Brookline, valued at $890,000, was used as collateral against the repayment. Meredith sold her BMW X5 and a 28-foot sailboat. Combined with the lost inheritance of $1.2 million, the total financial loss for Diane and Meredith reached approximately $1.635 million, plus an estimated $95,000 in legal fees. The social cost was harder to measure but impossible to miss. Diane was removed from the organizing committee of the Cape Cod Summer Arts Festival. Her membership at the Wiano Club was quietly cancelled. No public statement. Just a letter and a return deposit. 2 families in her Brookline neighborhood, people she'd eaten with for years, stopped inviting her. The money's traceable, the company is shut down, and the AG's office has everything they need, Nina told me during our final meeting. Financially, they're done. I thanked her, paid the remaining balance on her fee, and drove home through late summer traffic, thinking about a word I hadn't used in 4 years: enough. For the first time it meant something different. Not I'm not enough. But this is enough. This is where it stops. The message came at 3:17 in the morning on a night in late August when I couldn't sleep either. Meredith's name glowed on my phone screen, and I almost didn't open it. But something about the timestamp, the rawness of reaching out at 3 a.m., made me swipe. I know you probably won't read this, but I didn't know about the company when Mom set it up. She told me it was Real Consulting. I signed what she told me to sign. I'm not saying I'm innocent. I'm saying I didn't know how deep it went. I read it 4 times, sitting up in bed, the phone's blue light making my apartment feel like the bottom of a pool. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't believe her. Parts of it rang true. The way Meredith had always deferred to Diane, the way she'd been trained since childhood to nod and obey. But believing someone's confusion doesn't erase their choices. She signed every invoice. She deposited every check. The next morning, I called Nina. Is there evidence Meredith knew the company was fake? Nina was quiet for a moment. Meredith signed every invoice. She received every payment. Whether she understood the legal meaning is a question for a court, not for me. Fair enough. I thought about Meredith for days after that. 26 years old, raised under Diane's roof and Diane's rules, never taught to question, never required to earn. If I'd grown up in that house instead of on the whiterest porch with Dad, would I be different? I didn't know. But I knew that understanding someone's situation didn't mean accepting what they'd done with it. Have you ever had someone in your life who hurt you? Not out of meanness, maybe, but out of weakness? Someone you couldn't quite hate and couldn't quite forgive? I'd love to hear how you handled it. Share in the comments. I didn't respond to Meredith that night, but I saved her message. I had a feeling I'd need to read it again when I was ready to decide what kind of sister I wanted to be. September arrived the way it always does on Cape Cod, with a sharpening of the light and a thinning of the crowds, and for the first time, the season felt like mine. Gerald Whitmore invited me to join the Eastham Preservation Council as an architectural advisor. It was a volunteer position with no salary and a title that wouldn't impress anyone at a party, but it was the first time my name appeared on any board in the Cape Cod conservation community, and it appeared because of my work, not my last name. The Cape Cod Chronicle published a feature on the Eastham Lighthouse restoration in mid-September. The article was about the building, its history, its structural challenges, the 18 months of careful work that brought it back from near ruin. My name appeared in the 4th paragraph. Abigail Vance, the project's lead architect, has earned a reputation for careful preservation work that balances historical honesty with modern strength. There was no mention of the party, the fund, or Diane. And that was exactly what I wanted, to be known for what I built, not for what almost got taken from me. My studio's phone started ringing more often after that. 3 new restoration contracts came in from Cape Cod homeowners between September and November, totaling $420,000 in projected revenue. More than double what I'd earned the previous year. I turned down 2 podcast invitations and 1 request for a magazine profile. It's a private matter, I told each of them. The courts handled it. I wasn't being modest. I was being purposeful. The story I wanted to tell with my life wasn't about revenge. It was about work and roots and the stubborn act of building things that last. Victoria Marsh sent Thomas a letter in October thanking him for his cooperation. Her office was reviewing oversight rules for family-run charity funds in Massachusetts, using the Vance case, unnamed, as a reference study. My father's name was becoming what it should have been all along. A standard, not a prop. In October, Diane reached out, not to me directly, but through Thomas. She wanted to meet. She said she wanted to talk. I agreed, but on my terms. Thomas's office in Hyannis. Thomas present as mediator. No lawyer from Diane's side. No Meredith. No recordings from her end. If she wanted a conversation, it would happen in a room with clear walls and clear rules. We met on a Thursday afternoon. Diane looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe she just looked her age for the first time. No pearls, no silk, a gray cardigan buttoned to the collar, her hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup she never drank from. She cried. I expected that. She said, I only wanted to protect what Raymond built. I'd expected that too. I let her finish. Then I spoke. And I'd rehearsed this, not for drama, but for exactness, because I knew if I didn't get the words exactly right, I'd either say too little or too much. Diane, you didn't protect what he built. You tried to take what he left for me. I don't hate you. But I won't let you have access to my life the way you've had for the last 4 years. If you want a relationship, it starts with honesty, not control. Then I laid out 3 rules. First, all communication about property, finances, or estate matters would go through Thomas. No direct contact. Second, the fund repayment must be completed in full before any family gathering of any kind. Third, I would not attend any event organized under the Vance family name until the fund was restructured with independent oversight. Diane listened. She didn't argue. When I finished, she said quietly, almost to herself, You sound just like your father. Thank you, I said. That's the best thing you've ever said to me. A boundary isn't a punishment, and I wanted her to understand that. It's the price of staying in someone's life when trust has to be rebuilt from nothing. I responded to Meredith's message in November, 2 months after she'd sent it. I kept it short. I read your message. I believe you didn't understand the full picture, but you benefited from it. And that's something you have to own. If you want to talk, I'm open to it, but not as your sister who forgives everything. As someone who expects you to be honest. She wrote back within an hour, and we agreed to meet at a cafe in Falmouth. Halfway between us, neutral ground, no history attached to the walls. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Meredith looked different. Thinner, no makeup, her nails bitten short. She held her coffee with both hands like she was cold, even though the cafe was warm. She talked more honestly than I'd ever heard her talk about anything. Mom always told me what to think, she said. I never questioned it. That's not an excuse. It's something I have to fix. I didn't disagree, and I didn't rush to reassure her the way I might have a year ago. Instead, I told her the truth as I saw it. We can build something new, Meredith, but it has to be built on things we actually choose, not on things Mom decided for us. She nodded. I suggested she start seeing a therapist, not as a condition, but as a starting point. I gave her a name. This isn't for me, I said. This is for you. Then, near the end, Meredith told me something I'd never known. 2 weeks before Dad died, he called her. She was 22 then, still living at home. He said, Take care of your sister, Mare. She's going to need you. Meredith's voice broke. I failed him. I failed both of you. I reached across the table and held her hand. The first time in 4 years I'd touched my sister without a wall between us. I didn't forgive her that day, but I opened a door. What she does with it is up to her. I drove to Whiterest at the end of November when the Cape was empty and the wind had teeth. The locksmith met me at 9 in the morning. I watched him change every lock on every door. Front, back, side porch, the basement hatch Dad used to call the submarine entrance. When he handed me the new keys, I held them in my palm and felt their weight. The way you feel the weight of something you thought you'd lost forever. I hadn't set foot inside in 4 years. The house was intact but neglected in the way that only not caring can produce. The porch boards I'd replaced with Dad in the summer of 2018 were warped from moisture. The fence posts we'd painted together were peeling down to bare wood. The garden my mother had planted before I was born, the one Dad kept alive for 2 decades, had gone to weeds and wild grass. Diane hadn't taken care of any of it. She'd used the house the way she'd used everything, as a background, not a home. I hired a small crew from Truro. And then I did something I hadn't done since I was 17. I picked up a brush and started painting the fence myself. It took 3 days. My shoulders ached. My hands blistered and then hardened. And on the 3rd evening, while pulling up a rotten plank on the porch, I found a wooden box wedged under the floorboards, a cigar box, weathered but sealed with packing tape. Inside was a handwritten letter dated March 10, 2021, 5 days before Dad changed his will, 3 months before he died. Abby, if you're reading this, it means you found your way back. I knew you would. The house is yours. Not because it's valuable, but because you're the only one who understands what it means. Don't let anyone tell you what your legacy should be. Build it yourself. Love, Dad. I sat on the porch where he used to sit, holding his letter in his handwriting, and I cried for the first time since the funeral. Not because I was sad, because he'd known. He'd known all of it. What Diane would try, how long I'd wait, and that I'd come back when I was ready. He'd planned for everything except how much I'd miss him while I figured it all out. By January 2026, the fund had a new foundation. Thomas completed the restructuring over the holidays, and when he walked me through the final documents in his Hyannis office, I could see the relief on his face, the kind that comes not from winning, but from a promise finally kept. The Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund kept its original name. Dad had chosen it, and no one else's hands would change that. But everything underneath was rebuilt. Gerald Whitmore was made the new board chair, bringing with him 40 years of nonprofit management and a zero-tolerance rule for undocumented payments. Nina Aldridge agreed to serve as part-time treasurer on a clear, contracted basis, the fund's first-ever financial officer with actual forensic credentials. And the Attorney General's office required an independent audit every 12 months, done by a rotating external firm. Cape Cod 5 brought back its $50,000 yearly grant, depending on the new audit rules, a condition the bank had never required before and one that Thomas welcomed without hesitation. Accountability, he told me, isn't a burden, it's a foundation. Then came the part that surprised even Thomas. I decided to convert Whiterist's ground floor into a summer residency program for architecture students. 4 fellows, 6 weeks, working on real preservation projects along the Outer Cape under professional guidance. I called it the Vance Fellowship. The first group would arrive in June. I kept the second floor as private space, a bedroom, a drafting table by the window, the porch where Dad's letter had waited under the floorboards. That wasn't a sacrifice. It was a design choice, the same kind Dad had taught me to make. How to share a building without losing the room that matters most. My father left me a house, I told Thomas the day we signed the fellowship's charter. I'm turning it into a school. I think he'd like that. Thomas smiled, the first real, unguarded smile I'd seen from him in 7 months. He'd like it very much, he said. But he'd still want you to repaint that fence every summer. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed about Dad without it hurting. June 2026. 1 year to the week since Diane's phone call. I stood on the Whiterist porch with a mug of coffee, watching 4 architecture students from 3 different universities measure fence posts in the early morning light. They were arguing about joist spacing, the kind of argument Dad would have loved, the kind he used to settle by handing you a level and saying, "Don't guess, measure." My studio in South Boston now had 2 employees, Sierra, a structural drafting specialist, and Leo, a recent graduate from Wentworth who reminded me of myself at 23, all precision and quiet stubbornness. Yearly revenue for 2025 had come in at $680,000, up from $310,000 the year before. I'd signed a contract in April to restore a historic church in Provincetown, the kind of project that would have made Dad pull out a chair and ask me to walk him through every detail. Meredith and I saw each other once a month. We weren't close, not the way sisters in movies are close, but we were honest, which was better. She'd been in therapy since December. In March, she was hired as an events coordinator at a Boston nonprofit that matched low-income families with housing assistance. It was the first job she'd ever gotten without Diane's name on the application. When she told me about it over coffee, her eyes were bright in a way I'd never seen before. Not the brightness of performance, but of someone discovering for the first time that they could stand on their own. Diane had repaid $280,000 of the $340,000 she owed. The remaining $60,000 was on a court-approved payment plan. She did not come to Whiterist. I did not invite her. Neither of us pretended that was temporary. Thomas visited every July. He'd sit on the porch, drink coffee, and tell me stories about Dad. Cases they'd argued, jokes they'd shared, the time Raymond accidentally filed a motion in the wrong county and drove 90 miles to fix it before the clerk noticed. "You're the closest thing I have to a father now," I told him once. He set down his mug and looked at the ocean. "Your father would say I'm just the messenger. I didn't win a war. I won the right to stop fighting one." The night of July 12, 2026, exactly 1 year since the party, I sat at the drafting table in the upstairs bedroom at Whiterist and wrote a letter I could never send. "Dear Dad, I found the letter under the porch. I found the rule in the will. I found Thomas when I was ready. You planned for everything except how much I'd miss you while figuring it all out. Whitehurst is a school now. There are kids here learning to measure joists the way you taught me. They don't know your name yet, but they will. One of them, a girl from Springfield who's never seen the ocean before this summer, asked me yesterday why the porch faces east instead of south. I told her what you told me. Because the morning light is honest. It shows you everything. The cracks, the beauty, all of it. She wrote it down in her notebook. You would have liked her. I didn't let them take the house. And I didn't let them take me. I think you knew I wouldn't. That's why you left me the keys. Not just to the door, but to the choice. Meredith is trying. I don't know if she'll make it all the way, but she's walking in the right direction, and I think that matters. You asked her to take care of me. She didn't. But maybe I can take care of the space between us until she's strong enough to meet me in it. I love you. I miss your handwriting and your terrible coffee and the way you hummed when you were reading contracts. Abby. I folded the letter, walked downstairs, and placed it inside the cigar box under the porch next to his. The next morning, I woke early and walked to the beach. The tide was out, the sand firm and cold, the sky the color of unfinished steel. I walked for a long time without thinking about Diane or the party or the courtroom or any of it. I just walked. And the ocean did what it always does. Kept going, indifferent and enormous and exactly where it was supposed to be. The horizon didn't look different, but I did. Back in Boston, I reorganized my studio on a Sunday afternoon in mid-July. The kind of quiet, step-by-step work that calms me the way other people are calmed by music. I hung 3 things on the wall behind my drafting table. The first was a framed copy of the opening page of Dad's will. Not the penalty rule, not the property section, but the introduction where he'd written in his own hand. I leave these things not as possessions, but as responsibilities. May they be carried with honesty. The second was a photograph of the Eastham Lighthouse after restoration, taken from the cliff at sunset. Proof that broken things can be made whole if someone cares enough to learn how. The third was the charter for the Vance Fellowship, signed by its first 4 students in June. Their names written in careful block letters like a kind of promise. That evening, I wrote Thomas an email. I've decided to stop attending any event that uses Vance Family as a label for anything other than the fund. From now on, I'm Abigail, an architect, a fellow, a friend. Not Raymond's daughter. Not Diane's stepdaughter. Just me. He replied before I'd closed the laptop. That's the most Raymond Vance thing you've ever said. I smiled at the screen, shut it, and walked outside. South Boston in July is loud and bright and unapologetic. Car horns and laughter and someone grilling on a rooftop 3 buildings over. I stood on the sidewalk and let the city move around me for a minute, feeling something I didn't have a clean word for. Not happiness exactly. Not relief. Something more like alignment. The sense that the life I was living and the person I was had finally caught up to each other. I used to think legacy was something you inherited. Now I know it's something you build. One boundary, one blueprint, one honest choice at a time. That's my story. If any part of it felt familiar, the silence, the pressure, the moment you realized you deserved better, I hope this gives you permission to protect yourself the way my father protected me. Not with anger, but with preparation and principle. If this story stayed with you, please hit like and subscribe, and check the description below. There's another story there about someone who was told they'd never be enough. They proved everyone wrong. I think you'll want to hear it. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves and your boundaries.